Holding the bearing at all costs, braced at the helm, the steersman stood fast. Even in a gale, the goal was clear. Go faster, ever faster. This was the motto of the tall ships. With their 3, 4, or even 5 masts, they were the monarchs of the seas. They stamped their mark on the harsh and splendid age of ocean sailing. They stood for trade and business worldwide. Among the routes taken by the tall ships, the passage to Shanghai. Silk route, spice route, or China route, from Europe to the Far East via the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, 15,000 miles linking London with the trading posts of Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. The building of the Suez Canal at the end of the 19th century allowed the route to be reduced by almost 4,000 miles and cut around 50 days off the old journey to Shanghai. This route to the Near and Middle East, leading in turn to the Far East, was the ancient route between East and West, the route taken by the traditional merchant caravans. A path for exchanges not only commercial but also cultural, religious and scientific, exchanges which had already begun in the 1st century BC. When construction of the canal started in 1859, it was no more nor less than the fruition of the dream of all merchants of all eras. 20,000 men to dig 100 miles, taking advantage of the natural depressions along the Isthmus of Suez. 10 years' work. A canal between 40 and 100 meters wide and 12 meters deep. Millions of tons of backfill cleared by the sweat of humanity. It's an astonishingly straight line from the city of Port Said on the Mediterranean to Suez on the Red Sea. Not everyone looked kindly on the canal. The English put pressure to have construction halted because they were worried that they would lose their dominance on the sea route which went past the Cape of Good Hope. From the start, political considerations were added to the technical challenge of the canal. This extraordinary undertaking saw the light of day thanks to 2 people, the Frenchman Ferdinand de Lesseps, engineer, project manager and financial backer for the operation, and Mohammed Said, Viceroy of Egypt, the man who signed the contract on December the 15th, 1858. This contract authorized the work to get underway using free labor for many years. So the canal was the victory of steam over sail. It reduced the distance between London and China by almost a third, shortening the journey by several weeks. But some shipping merchants remained convinced that sail could still compete with steam. Boats twice as big as the clippers, the tall ships. This journey in the wake of the tall ships will be made by the Spirit of Hennessy, a modern 44-meter clipper. A nostalgic journey organized by a young company director in the wake of his ancestors. For them it was the cognac route, named after the luxury product they used to deliver to the trading posts of Asia, and which had become the favorite drink in the colonies. Gilles Hennessy bears the name of his illustrious ancestors, and he was determined to recreate their journey. Remembering, always remembering, that every time it was a whole new expedition. If you're going halfway around the world, you must expect to run into high winds, gales, hurricanes, and there's always an element of risk.
Everyone finds it hard to imagine the crossings in those days. They were up against tempests, cold, masts which snapped, which they had to try to replace, sails which had torn when there was no replacement sail. There are tales that they even took the sailors' shirts to try and plug breaches.
To understand the risks involved, you need only look at the statistics. If so few tall ships remain today, it's because they were not immortal. Nearly a quarter of those fine racers disappeared before they were 10 years old. Reefs, shoals, storms, fire.
The other thing which I feel characterized the voyage in those days was that when the captain had decided to load on board the maximum of goods and freight, the sailors had nowhere to sleep. They slept among a heap of crates, and their quarters were taken up by freight. So they slept at best little and badly. It was really a terrible life.
On the outward voyage from Europe, mainly London, the cargo would be raw materials, iron, steel, or luxury goods such as Manchester cotton or cognac. On the return journey, the holds would be full of tea, silks, or porcelain.
Nowadays, there are obviously just super tankers and super container ships. The age of sailing ships is sadly over. There are a certain number of people like myself who are nostalgic for that age. But modern times must progress. That's life.
They were the pride of the shipping merchants. The captains fought for the honor of their charge, the chance to take them into the Indian Ocean. Running along these shores from which the British had built their empire, which Her Majesty's seamen had made their own back garden, heading for Malaysia and the Malacca Straits, waters which today are plied by freighters. The ocean, the sea. The human imagination has so often been led to flights of lyricism, perhaps to ward off the fear it inspires. People speak of giant birds which slide across a limitless ocean, of cathedrals made of canvas, which make fantastic crossings on the routes to the Orient. Of course, the spirit of Hennessy, which is here recreating the journey, is a beautiful boat, a sleek, thoroughbred clipper, a living thing which speaks through the muted, melodious sounds of the blocks, the rigging, the sails, or the clanking of the capstans. But these voyages were not pleasure cruises. When a storm was brewing, there was no question of reducing sail. Speed was of the essence, so it was the crew who suffered. The smallest of tacks would take at least an hour of continual maneuvers. The slightest mistake could lead to disaster. The captain's speech was simple. If you don't toe the line, if orders are not executed at the double, or if there are any complaints about the food, I can promise you that this boat will be sheer hell, and I'll make sure that I'm the devil of it. 18 sails on 3 masts, from the foresail to the topgallant, and as many as 15 jibs. Staysails on the foretop and mizzen masts, or a flying jib, sometimes as much as an acre of canvas. Sails which had to be reefed, hoisted or furled, and up there more than 150 feet above the deck, the topmen were sent to set the highest of all, the royal, towering above the flyer, the topgallant, the maintop and the mainsail. Devourers of sheet and haulers of canvas, less romantic, but much nearer the truth. And when it wasn't time to maneuver, it was time for fatigues, cleaning the deck, spiking the rust, polishing the brasses, repairing the sails, splicing, bracing. And in the evening, sea shanties on the forecastle, sailors' yarns and drink were the only comfort before going back to battle with the yards for another maneuver. The topmen balancing on the yardarm, no more than a steel cable, who were described by the writer Herman Melville as angels of the last judgment between heaven and earth. Land ahoy! The lookout would have shouted from the crow's nest. We're now nearing Malaysia, and to the north of her west coast, a necklace of islands strings out. The land where the winds meet, the name given to Malaysia by sailors in the past, quite simply because the winds change in rhythm with the monsoons, 6 months from the northeast, 6 months from the southwest, with the peninsula in the middle. This meteorological factor has made the Malacca Straits a strategic meeting point of merchant routes. 3 of the major trading posts on the Shanghai route are here: Penang, Malacca, and Singapore. Along the Malaysian coast, there are gaps in the lush vegetation, rivers, and at their ends, fishing villages. A village on stilts, no better place to appreciate the quality which seems to have stamped the Malaysians forever. A pleasure in taking time over life. The jungle, the heat, the tropical humidity. These are fishermen, but the sea is not their calling. They fish the coastline, according to tradition. Large baskets to crowd in the fish. Small individual nets. As soon as it's caught, the fish is gutted and prepared for drying. Large grates under the sun for the butterfly fish which are found particularly in the coral reefs. The traditional Malaysian fishing boat is the prau, a barge of Indonesian origin which is now built here. Malaysia is a country of wood. All the tropical hardwoods are on offer, and a good many coastal villages have earned renown for boat building. Trade becomes all the more brisk when the fishermen cannot go out during the 3 months of rains and monsoon. Fishing is too dangerous, so it's time to repair and build. Continuing on our way on the great trade route, we have to leave behind the calm and tranquility of this tiny island, just one of the 99 which make up the Langkawi archipelago. Instead, we thread our way through this maze, once the haunt of pirates and buccaneers who plundered the ships of the Malacca Straits. It was impossible to pursue them in this watery labyrinth. To this very day, the area has a name for danger. For the tall ships, this would have been the halfway point of the Shanghai Passage, and the unending work of the sail haulers would redouble, gnawing away the knots. Sailors are not the same as other men, they count in knots, 6,080 feet their nautical miles, and to make more of them faster you have to go back up into the yards, fingers stiff with cold, hands bloodied by the beating of the lanyards. The sails have to be furled, the canvas brought in and lashed tight, again and again, for between 100 and 120 days. Halfway. At last, a port of call. Time to drop anchor. Penang. The island of Penang, less than 5 miles from the Malaysian coast, a place which was practically deserted until the British took an interest in 1786 to ensure dominion over the Gulf of Bengal and create a base to provide fresh supplies for the ships going on to China. The island of Penang at the mouth of the Malacca Straits made an ideal site, its coast sheltered from the winds and with the possibility of accommodating high-tonnage ships. Nowadays, Penang is a somewhat forgotten trading post. Since Singapore at the south of the Malaysian peninsula has made a monopoly of the region's seaborne trade, Penang continues to live only on its former splendor. The island's economy survives mainly on tourism and the otherworldly charm of its capital, Georgetown. Georgetown, a city built on gold. There used to be thick jungle here, and legend has it that in order to speed up clearing, Francis Light, the founder of the trading post, one day stuffed a cannon with gold coins and shelled this treasure into the undergrowth. Everyone got down to work with a vengeance so as to recover the coins. British presence and domination lasted until 1957. The old world charm of the colonies, where the Crown's representative doffed a hat of office decorated with swan plumes and surrounded by local dignitaries, went to review the garrison of Sikh soldiers. Georgetown, a colonial city with its vast squares of lawn in front of the former government buildings, a model of careful urban planning. Many of the houses today belong to large multinationals. Just like everywhere else in Malaysia, the roads are devoid of pavements, and the continual arrival of new tradesmen has increasingly muddled the urban planning, creating a maze of alleys at the foot of the tower blocks. Penang is above all an opportunity to understand why Malaysia is often nicknamed Asia in miniature. A patchwork of races, cultures and religions from all four corners of Asia. The native Aborigines number just 20 or 30,000. The true Malaysians arrived more than 2,000 years ago. The newcomers are Chinese, Indian or Tamil. Communities which live side by side rather than mix. The Malaysian 45% has the reins of power. The Chinese 40% runs the economy. All kinds of race, religion and superstition. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, animists. A melting pot of gods, legends and ancestral rites. A strange blend of Confucian and Buddhist and other thinking. One could say that Malaysia lives to the beat of religious festivals, and the Chinese community holds the most joyous of all. The Chinese are Buddhist or Taoist. The temple of Kuan Yin is the oldest of the city's Chinese temples. The temple of the street masses, Kuan Yin, the goddess of mercy. She helps all who seek her. In front of an audience of beggars, proceedings are permanently clouded in incense. Good luck is invoked by burning false banknotes in honor of the goddess. The state religion here is Islam. It cements the community of the land's children. Muslims since the 15th century, converted by merchants. Safe from the bustle of the city, on Ayah Hitam Hill, Keklok Si, the Temple of Paradise, the Monastery of Supreme Blessing, the Temple of 10,000 Buddhas. So many titles for this crown jewel of Buddhism, the largest Buddhist temple in Southeast Asia. The pilgrimage of Thaipusam, an ancient Hindu festival and the most popular among the Malaysian Indians. It's certainly nowhere more spectacular than at the temple in Penang. The pilgrims repent their sins and entreat the favors of the gods. Mortification of the flesh. Those who truly repent do not bleed. Seeking absolution to the beat of tambours. Religious zeal, a feast in honor of the god Subramaniam, fathered by Shiva to fight against evil. Muslim festivals, Chinese festivals and Hindu festivals. Malaysian life runs according to the three calendars. and even if there are officially only 5 public holidays each year, there are at least 4 or 5 feasts and festivals each month. The Festival of Lights, Diwali, is in October, a revelry of oil lamps, candles and Bengal fire to celebrate the execution of the tyrant Narakasura by Krishna, the triumph of good over evil. On the seafront of Penang, a place with special character, Clan Piers. It's a village built on stilts above the sea. Each landing stage belongs to a single family or clan. Only members of that clan may live there or berth there. The inhabitants are boatmen for crossing back to the mainland, or fishermen. At low tide, the boats are left stranded on the shore. Barges of all sizes, tiny docks made up of a few planks laid on the sand, a rich haven for merchandise. A large part of the city's traditional sea trade goes on here. Thai and Indian silks and Japanese cameras and electronic gadgets pass through Clan Piers. Halfway through the Shanghai passage, the Spirit of Hennessy gets a facelift.
Here in Malaysia, we have decided to paint the ship white. The old blue color was very good in Europe, but here it will attract too much heat, so we have decided to paint it white, which will reflect the heat and make it cooler to live on board.
A job well done. The workmanship of the Malaysian dockyards is renowned. Know-how that some of the Navy bases along the coast provide as a service to civilian boats. Bearing due south, heading for Malacca. Life on board resumes under the gaze of the old man, the nickname for the captain on the sailing ships of times gone by. It was up to him to keep the crew in order, which was not so easy, because there were all types on board. Many fine fellows, but also hotheads and undesirables. When there was a lack of manpower, the press gangs would bring on board former criminals. The captain had to make an impression by being alternately stern and good-natured, and never hesitating when it was necessary to make use of the cat-o'-nine tails, the whip with 9 lashes for corporal punishment. There was also torture by strappado. The guilty sailor was attached to a rope at the top of the main yard and plunged violently 3 times into the sea. That was the way to cool rebels. Witness to these punishments of another era, Herman Melville relates his experience on an American ship in his book White Jacket. However much you may desire to absent yourself from the scene that ensues, yet behold it you must, or at least stand near it you must, for the regulations enjoin the attendance of almost the entire ship's company, from the corpulent captain himself to the smallest boy who strikes the bell. All hands witness punishment, ahoy! To the sensitive seaman, that summons sounds like a doom. He knows that the same law which impels it, the same law by which the culprits of the day must suffer, that by that very law he is also liable at any time to be judged and condemned. Malaysia is a huge forest which starts at the shore and spreads all the way up to the highest peaks on the peninsula. Trees, always trees, a monotonous country. When you go into it, you find the enchanted forest. That's how Henri Fauconnier described Malaysia. It's the oldest jungle in the world, 2,500 different species of tree, and the heavier rubber makes 2,501. Henri Fauconnier was a planter, a rubber planter. Nowadays, Malaysia is the world's #1 rubber producer, and yet the hevea is only an imported tree. A century ago, the British brought seeds from Brazil. Today, thousands of acres have been planted. Hidden at the verdant heart of Malaysia, the Kampung, traditional villages. Half the population of Malaysian origin lives here in these houses on stilts, which are still arranged along the same lines, overlooking orchards and flower gardens. No roads. Paths are the only access. Shaded by the large leaves of oil palms, the Kampung is always small scale, as if hidden away in the countryside. Here in Ipoh, the capital of Perak state, there are Hindu and Chinese temples, grottos carved into the limestone hills. Malaysia is a country of imported agricultural crops. After the hevea, tea. Tea plants as far as the eye can see in the mountainous Cameron Highlands. At the start of the century, the West was no longer willing to take on the lengthy and expensive transport from China of tea, which had become a national drink, quite essential to the British. The climate of this part of Malaysia seemed ideal to the English. They purchased land and brought in expert and cheap Indian immigrant labour. Today's result is that there are millions of tea plants. Growth is limited to 1.5 meters to make it easier to pick, using clippers and baskets. It's intensive farming, 2 harvests a year. Malaysia has thus become one of the major tea-growing countries. A dozen miles wide, the Malacca Straits between Sumatra and Malaysia. For centuries, the route that had to be taken by merchant ships loaded with exotic spice and produce. The spirit of Hennessy enters it proudly. Pride at going to birth in Malacca, a city of 1,001 tales. In the 15th century, when European merchants looked to Asia, coveting the Muslim-controlled market for spices, their eyes turned first towards Malacca. No surprise then that this was the first city to be colonized. In 1510 it was taken by the Portuguese, 130 years later by the Dutch, and then at the end of the 18th century by the English. Bukit China, the Chinese hill, the Sultan's gift to the 500 ladies-in-waiting of his wife, daughter to the Emperor of China. That was in the 15th century. These days, it's the largest Chinese cemetery outside China, 12,500 neglected graves, some going back to the Ming dynasty. Town Square remains from the Dutch presence, its architecture a replica of cities of commerce in Holland, a square bordered by administrative buildings and a large church. Town Square is also called Red Square. The buildings are brick, specially imported from Holland, and subsequently painted over in salmon pink. Christchurch, the oldest Protestant church in Malaysia. 350 years of foreign occupation have in their course tempered Malacca's position from having the statute of a major commercial port in 1500 to being simply a sleepy old town in 1920. This is how Somerset Maugham described it. A once important city which lives off the memory of its lost glory. A stifled city where those who come to settle lose their own energy, little by little allowing the air of carelessness and languor to win them over. Traces of every period of Malacca's history have been conserved. From the Portuguese presence, there are left today the ruins of the Santiago Gate, a visible part of the remains of the so-called A Famosa, the Beautiful, the fortress built under the supervision of Alphonse Albuquerque, who took the city in 1511 after a month-long siege. Behind these ramparts there used to be a castle, 2 palaces, and 5 churches. There remain a few graves belonging to the Iberian colonists persuaded to conduct a real crusade here. Their mission was to make Catholic conversions and to fight off pirates from all sides. The Portuguese legacy is not restricted to the ruins of A Famosa. A few miles from the city centre live the direct descendants of the Lusitanian soldiers. 70 houses lodge the purest, the least mixed Portuguese in Malaysia. They're fishermen. Their language is called Cristão, a dialect used in southeast Portugal in the Middle Ages. This community of 500 is unique in Malaysia, since the other 15,000 Eurasians of Portuguese origin are scattered all over the peninsula. A medieval atmosphere still holds sway all along the river that winds through the city. Time seems to stand still here. Back in 1879, that was the opinion of Isabella Bird, the courageous Victorian woman traveller. With each day, Malacca fascinates me more. Among other things, it has a sort of medieval atmosphere. The noise of modern life only reaches the place in the form of feeble echoes. On a rickshaw or trishaw, the dormant city reveals itself. According to legend, it would take a cat walking on the rooftops a year to go all the way round. The architectural remnants from the different periods. The old-world charm of a city whose paradox is that each successive colonization weakened its role and position in the Malaysian world. The Portuguese, through their religious intolerance, forced the traders who had made the place famous to flee. The 5-month Dutch siege in 1641 destroyed the city and decimated its population. And after deciding that their capital in the East Indies would be Jakarta, those strict Protestants of Holland only occupied Malacca in order to prevent other nations from settling there. British reasoning was hardly any different, since under their rule priority was given first to Penang and then to Singapore. The hot, humid climate of Malaysia produces an abundance of tropical fruit of all sorts, more than 40 varieties of banana, pineapples, mandarins, watermelons. At the market, the fishmongers at their stalls rub shoulders with dealers in spices and products completely unrecognizable to Westerners. They'll come across the durian, the queen of Malaysian fruits, shaped like a rugby ball and spiky as a hedgehog. The pulp is creamy, rich and fruity, but its strong smell puts off the untutored palate. The rambutan, a small hairy red fruit whose flesh is quite like a lychee. Or then again the duku, with its bitter stone, or the foot-long jack. Fish. There's intensive fishing here for local consumption and for tuna exported to Japan. Praus and wood. Only low-tonnage vessels can moor at the river wharves. Their cargo, wood, one of Malaysia's chief export products, along with rubber and palm oil. Deforestation has become a real problem. A balance must be found between protecting the natural heritage and supplying one of the most profitable national industries. The praus, with their turned-up bow and stern, recall the boats of the past which used to congest the channel. Even before the Portuguese conquest, it was a place of hectic commerce. Chinese gold and silver, Siamese ivory, Indian silk and Arab perfumes were all traded in this port. Even nowadays, barter deals with sailors arriving from Sumatra sometimes flourish. No more silk, camphor or spices. Often there's no more than wood or coal haulage to keep the city's fires burning. The port has silted up. The city sleeps deeply. Under sail once more in the Malacca Straits. The Sea of Every Danger will be its nickname in future, because it's one of the bottlenecks designated strategic to the exchange of goods on this planet. 2,000 ships of all sizes pass through daily. Obviously, there's a danger of pollution and collision. 5 serious accidents in 1992, which were not just a question of supertankers, but also freighters, navy ships and trawlers. Malaysia and Singapore have proposed imposing a toll on all the boats which pass through the strait so as to pay for a force to supervise it properly. Another danger on the upsurge is piracy, originating from Indonesia. More than 200 attacks a year. The authorities in the area tremble at the thought of an oil tanker or a freighter carrying chemical products turned into a ghost ship by pirates. The colours are struck to salute Singapore, both an island city and a state, independent since 1965. A tiny state of 239 square miles, with 2,600,000 inhabitants. Oil from the Middle East transits here on the way to Japan. Australian minerals bound for Europe and the United States. And all this commerce makes Singapore the second largest port in the world. There are hundreds of open sea anchorages and 7 entry channels. It's truly a service station to the seas. Fresh supplies, maintenance, repairs, shipbuilding. The nicknames for Singapore: Mythical Island, Tropical Turntable, Venice of the Far East, China with money. Singapore, literally the city of the lion, was originally a swampy island belonging to the Sultan of Java. Every population which had tried to settle there had been forced to give up because of malaria from the marshes. But none of this frightened Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles, who bought the island practically deserted in 1819. His aim was to counter the Dutch monopoly in the region. The first tasks, to make the swamps clean and build up a free port. Raffles pulled in Chinese manpower and lured in the traders. The main trading commodities: tea and silk from China, Malaysian tin and Indonesian spices. Singapore claims to be the second port in the world after Rotterdam. Business is dominated by continuous container traffic. 1 or 2 facts will give a good idea of the massive scale of this permanent activity. A ton lifted every second, 9 mooring points, 18 cranes. It takes 8 hours to load a ship. 60,000 arrivals and departures per annum, which means 1 ship on the move every 9 minutes. The brand new terminus at Tanjong Pagar is a model of organization and time management in a completely computerized environment where the canary yellow cranes load non-stop. Container transport has revolutionized ocean freight. It's the jumbo Lego of international trade. Trade from here is distributed to 300 ports worldwide. More than 600 shipping companies regularly visit these endless quays. The perpetual contact with developed countries very quickly gave rise to huge investment and the establishment of turnkey factories. Singapore has also become an industrial city and a top-ranking financial city. The main trade partner is the United States, with 20% of exports as against just 9% for Japan. The buildings get bigger and bigger, taller and taller, an international symbol for this new industrialized nation. The Westin Stamford, the highest hotel in the world, with 73 floors, and under the watchful eye of its founder, Raffles, the Singapore of the past, the Raffles Hotel, where it's still possible to stay in the Somerset Maugham suite. For Singapore, building a nation is not just a slogan. The city is like a permanent building site, and some think the crane has become the national bird. Old buildings disappear at the bat of an eyelid. In 25 years, the Ministry of Housing, the country's largest contractor, has built more than 45,000 apartments. The aim may have been to house the population, but it also showed a burning desire for hygiene, an obsession with cleanliness. The old districts have been systematically destroyed, including superb colonial residences, all in the name of health. There are still some leftovers from the Chinese, Hindu and Malaysian districts, scraps which recall a sad past made up of malaria, typhoid, misery and the Japanese occupation. In between the tower blocks and the expressways, you occasionally come across a fragment of the old Chinatown, in a pitiful state. You will still meet old, wrinkled Chinamen. Singapore is at one and the same time the Far East, when you turn a street corner, and also the West, at the very next crossroad. The temples have avoided destruction, but are no longer frequently visited because the past has made little impact on the people here, who've opted for all that is modern and are resolutely forward-looking. A few dingy stalls survive, though countless peddlers have moved on to flashy new air-conditioned shopping centres. The city has lost its smells, hygiene has won, but it's less lively. And what if Singapore missed its past? Aware that they may have slightly overstepped the mark with the steamroller, the authorities have designated about 40 acres as protected zones, 4% of the city centre renovated as it was before, but clean. The hawkers' shops and the filth which did not bother the British colonial authorities are well and truly over and done with. Over the last 30 years, tough policy and punitive fines have made the country a model of discipline. These pictures from the archives are literally part of a bygone age. They would astonish more than a few of Singapore's young generation who wouldn't recognize at all the city they live in today. Singapore, meeting of races, said Somerset Maugham. It's hard to create an identity without traditions or religious beliefs. People here over the age of 50 have been successively British subjects, Japanese during the war, then British again, next Malaysian for 10 years, and finally Singapore nationals. In Singapore, trade is a prime mover behind the economy. Earnings per capita are now 5 times higher than in neighbouring Malaysia. They leave a country such as Portugal a long way behind. Shops and stalls of all kinds are open day and night. Singapore seems never to stop moving. Demographic problems in Singapore are the opposite of the problems in developing countries. A lack of local manpower means that foreign workers have to be called in. Ironically, 20 years ago, with the fear of overpopulation, the official slogan was 2 is enough. Nowadays they say 3 is better. Apart from gambling, which the authorities have not managed to ban, the people of Singapore have another source of pleasure: food. Even a Swiss would be surprised by how clean Singapore is. And there's a good reason. The fines are very heavy. $150 if you forget to flush a public lavatory. Better still, it's illegal to import chewing gum because of pollution. In case you need reminding that we really are in Asia, there's the opera. They sing and dance on stage to appease the spirits. A traditional show in which protests, howls, indignations, sweet love songs, moans and threats take their turns. The power of the community over the individual is confirmed, quite the opposite of Western individualism. In the space of 30 years, Singapore has become one of the most feared of the Asian dragons, practically overdeveloped. The island has money and ambitions to go with it. The city sincerely hopes in time to have a powerful status in line with its financial means.
In my opinion, the 19th century was dominated by Europe in trade overall. The 20th century in general can be put down to the USA after the First World War. I'm practically convinced that the 21st century will belong to the Asian powers we call the Little Dragons. Take, for example, Taiwan, which is a small country with a population of 20 million people, with boundless energy, which has at this point in time the largest dollar reserves in the world, more than $80 billion of reserves, and an extraordinary export surplus, boundless energy, and it's just a country of 20 million people. When you also think of the economic opening of China, advocated by Deng Xiaoping at the moment, you have the length of the coastal strip from Shanghai all the way to Guangzhou, formerly Canton, more than 200 million people who are also overflowing with energy because all these Chinese are extremely creative and into business and enterprise. I think that Europe will have to wake up and unite very quickly to counterbalance this boundless energy. Otherwise, we will have a lot of problems fighting against this activity and way of doing business, which is much more aggressive than we Europeans.
The economic success of Singapore is dependent on unrelenting work, modern management, and massive foreign investment. And it should be added the absence of corruption, which makes it a rare exception in this part of the world. As the 21st century dawns, Singapore firmly intends to be a model society in tomorrow's world. The establishments along the straits have certainly changed. Penang, Malacca and Singapore, British trading posts in the last century. Their livelihood no longer depends on trade from the tall ships and clippers. The result of decolonization has been different from place to place. Penang is run down, Malacca dormant, and Singapore enriched. As for the sailors, they have resumed their voyage in their world apart. Men are of three types: the living, the dead, and those who are at sea. The quotation comes from an anonymous Greek poet. It still holds true. On the China Passage, on the trail of yesterday's tall ships, the spirit of Hennessy and her crew have not had the last of their surprises. There are several days at sea ahead of them, along the coasts of Asia, with fishermen as company, or pirates lying in wait. At the end of the passage, two still more wonderful cities, Hong Kong and Shanghai.